All right, let's rock and roll. I don't have an opening statement. Yeah, EJ.
Well, Mr. Chairman, last time you said you were going to seek further details from the White House regarding the executive order on independent agencies. So I'll give you a chance to make your quasi-opening. And to what extent have you received further detail, and what's the nature of that?
Yeah, we've had communications. With them on. I went over there and met with OMB to talk about our budget. Our budget characteristics. One of which is we don't use any tax dollars. We are deficit neutral. And because we don't use tax dollars. So I went over there to brief them on that. I met with someone from the National Energy Council, talked about FERC's different types of proceedings, which I talked about last month at the press conference. So far, we're proceeding to do our work. We're doing it, as I said last month, 98%, I think, of our cases are cases that come in the door, and they're handled under various statutes like Federal Power Act. So we just continue to do our work, and so far there's not been an issue with us not being able to do our work. Yeah.
Hi, Carlos with E&E News. I wanted to ask about FERC's sunshine meeting notices. The notices only have the docket numbers on them, but a lot of times it's not clear what's being voted on. And I wanted to ask about that. What do you think that says about the transparency of FERC? And do you think that there could be a description that says this is exactly what we're voting on today? Thank you.
You think we know what we're voting on? I have no idea what you're talking about. I really don't. You can talk to OEA about what goes in that sunshine notice. Yeah. I think FERC's very transparent, by the way. I think there's no question about what we vote on. So if there's a need to put some more sunshine on the sunshine notice, we'll let the people who do the sunshine notice work on that.
Okay, I'm asking because sometimes, if you look at a docket, there could be multiple things on that individual docket that could potentially be voted on. So if there's not an explanation next to the docket number on the notice, then it could be a number of things that could potentially be voted on at the meeting.
Well, I think everybody knows what we're voting on, but nevertheless, I'll let you talk to OEA about.
Carlos, let's talk about that after the meeting.
Yeah, we don't. To my knowledge, we've never come after a meeting and somebody said, hey, you voted on something that wasn't really on the docket, or you didn't vote on something. I mean, it seems to be we know what we're voting on, and it gets voted on, and the secretary posts it, and everybody knows what got voted on. But nevertheless, it could be, if it could be more clear, we'll let the appropriate people work on it. Yep, Daniel.
Daniel Moore with Axios. I was wondering if you had any reaction to the firings of FTC commissioners this week, and any concern that the president could target FERC commissioners down the road if PCs fit.
Well, I'll say what I said last month. The only lawyers that are in court today arguing that FERC commissioners should be fireable at will is in a case in the Middle District in North Carolina. One of them is a former FERC commissioner, and one of them is a former Solicitor General for President Clinton. We haven't received any indication otherwise, and I think clearly there's going to be a test case going to Supreme Court on Humphrey's executor. We talked about that a month ago. And that test case has been teed up, and we'll see what happens. Yes, and what's your name?
Hi, I'm new. My name's Emma Whitford. I report on AI for MLEX.
For who?
For MLEX, it's we focus on regulatory risk. We have a good number of reporters in DC. The data center issue has kind of brought me in.
Okay.
My understanding is
welcome.
Thank you. So PJM has a deadline of Monday to reply to your request in the collocation issue. I thought you could give like a high-level sense of just what comes next there. How long it might be to come to any conclusion there.
Well, that's a pending proceeding, so I'm going to be really careful that I don't talk about the merits. We set up 30-day comment periods. So the first round does come 30, and you said it was what, Monday?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was 30 days from when we, from the last open meeting, because that's when we voted it out. And then I think there's another 30-day period for people to reply to the first round of comments. And then, as I've said before, and I'm glad to say it again, once the comments are in, round 1, round 2, we're going to act as quickly as we can. Because we know a lot of people want to see what we do. So we want to act quickly. Yeah, George.
Hi, George Wycamp from Platts. Just kind of wanted to follow up to Daniel's question on Humphrey's executor and the firing of the FTC commissioners. I'm just kind of curious if you have any thoughts on what this change could mean for the commission's independence, especially as, both FTC commissioners were Democrats, what this could mean for the commission going forward as a bipartisan agency, and if you think that the president currently, under current Supreme Court precedent, has the ability to fire FERC commissioners at will.
Again, the only lawyers in court right now arguing that FERC commissioners should be fired at will are former FERC commissioner and former Solicitor General for President Clinton. We worked with the Department of Justice itself on responding in that case. I know, George, you've written about it, and Keith Goldberg, if you're out there in cyberspace, you've written about it. So you're well aware of that case, and we worked with the Department of Justice in responding. And the Humphreys executor issue didn't they raised it, but arguing that FERC commissioners are fireable at will. The DOJ worked with us on the response. So we're here, all 5 of us. Yeah, Callie?
Callie Pattison, Washington Examiner. As the commission is moving forward in terms of making new rules for co-location resources, I wanted to see if you could preview anything that the commission is thinking about when it comes to state regulators and their role in overseeing potential co-location agreements with utilities.
That's a really good question, and it's a really good issue. And we teed it up in the co-location 206 that we put out. So because we did tee it up, and we're going to be getting comment on it, and we're going to be addressing it from a substance standpoint, I want to sort of stop there. But it's an excellent question. It's an excellent issue, and we teed it up big time, which is the issue of state versus federal jurisdiction. If you know me, that's one thing I always look to first, being a former state regulator, is what is the state jurisdiction, what is the federal jurisdiction, and where do they overlap, and where is the dividing line. So that's teed up in there. Yeah, Maya?
Maya Weber, Platts. Thanks for doing this. I had a question about the memo that went out from OPM and I think OMB across the government, asking agencies to come up with plans for reductions in force if there's perhaps staff that's not necessary to meet statutory requirements. Can you give a sense of, whether you responded to it, and if so, how, and would you anticipate any significant changes at FERC?
Well, we responded to it, I think, last week with that we were going to look at all the divisions and see what efficiencies could be made, and but our goal and my goal from the beginning is we want to run FERC efficiently. Again, we don't spend a dollar of taxpayers' money, so there's no deficit impact from what FERC does, and I think we're a well-run agency, frankly. And we want to make sure we have the people to do the job. So I think there's another deadline, but you have to respond later. But the whole goal is to make sure that we keep the right people, we keep the people who are doing the job, so we can do our mission.
And I guess one follow-up, did you recommend any specific cuts so far?
No.
Okay, thanks.
No, not cuts, but looking at reorganizing and how do we make sure that what we're doing is as efficient as possible, and making sure that the money that we do spend, because we do spend money, it comes from regulated entities, is spent most efficiently, and making sure we use our personnel in the best way. Yeah, Tom?
Thanks. Tom Tiernan with the Energy Daily. Following up on that a bit, there were executive orders issued by the White House on national energy emergency and unleashing American energy that I believe sought input on processes to speed approval of energy facilities. Have you done any kind of internal assessment? Has there been any steps taken to look at that or respond or take steps internally to address those.
Well, the energy EO, I think it was Section 5, talked about faster permitting, and we're all over that because that's what we want to do. And this is under the Natural Gas Act, is to move our permitting as efficiently and as quickly as we can. And so we've been focusing on that from first day I was chair. And FERC has a good track record of processing Natural Gas Act applications under Section 3, Section 7. So we're perfectly consistent with that. I think it was Section 5 of that EO about faster permitting. That's absolute. Of course we want to do that, sure. And we reported to them that's what we want to do because, that's something we'd say publicly from the rooftops. We do want to do permitting efficiently and quickly.
So you did respond to that executive order?
Yeah, we sent a letter saying that we absolutely intend to do faster permitting. We would do that regardless. That's the big goal of ours is the permitting process shouldn't drag on for 2 or 3 years. I mean, if an infrastructure project is needed, and that is the central finding under the Natural Gas Act, is the project needed? So if you make the central finding that it's needed, then you don't want to hold it up and if it's needed, it's needed. It's needed now. So you want to get it built. So of course we want to do that. We absolutely want to do that. Yeah, Maya.
Can I just ask, were there any specific changes that you have made along those lines?
Well, we're just trying to do it faster and trying to do it efficiently. And we have a great staff. Terry Turpin and OEP, our Office of Energy Projects, are professionals. We need every one of them. I don't want to lose any of them. We may need more because if new projects come in, which I expect that there will be an increase in projects. So they do a great job, and it's just, you're always looking at your processes. Now, one change, I will say this. As you know, I think it was like right off the bat, the Trump administration, when they came in, withdrew the CEQ, Council on Environmental Quality, the CEQ regs on how you do NEPA permitting, EI. So many acronyms in this business, like I said, they fall like confetti. So in any project under the Natural Gas Act, the biggest single part that takes time, the biggest time-consuming part of the process are the NEPA reviews, the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA reviews. And FERC historically, for at least 20 years, has followed the CEQ guidance on how you do NEPA reviews. And so, right off the bat, this administration withdrew the CEQ regs on NEPA reviews. So we are developing our own processes. So if you ask, are there changes, Tom, you ask, are there changes? Yes. We're no longer using the CEQ guidance because it's gone. And so we're developing our own. So what we're doing is we still follow NEPA, because of course we follow NEPA. But there have been some changes because of, give an example, the CEQ regulations required a very detailed environmental justice analysis using they have like a computer, they had a metrics over there anyway. So that's no longer being used to determine community impacts. We focus on community impacts. We focus on local impacts. But just as we did in Virginia when I was a state regulator, you look at the community impacts for all the people who are affected in the community. You just don't do it by the EJ definition. So that's been a change, and I think it's a good change, quite frankly, because you should be looking at the community impacts on all people. All people. And so we do that. So that's a change. That's a change. Yeah, Catherine.
A little bit of a subject change to the agenda. Could you explain what exactly happened in the SPP order today? Because my understanding was the that market expansion was approved in January. It seems like there was a big change made to it today, but I don't really understand what happened there.
Okay, what we did in January, and I hope I get this right, we approved the Markets Plus, which is their day-ahead market. Today, we approved the expansion of the RTO structure into the Western Interconnect. One interesting thing about the proposal today is there are really not a lot of utilities involved in this. It's mostly co-ops and a couple divisions of Western Power Marketing Federal. I don't think a single state regulated utility is involved in this. Not one. Not one state regulated utility is involved in this. I think it's all co-ops, and I think it's part of what they call WAPA, which is Western Area Power. So I'm not trying to diminish the significance, but what I'm telling you is there are no state regulated utilities that are in the Western Interconnect that came in this one. Maybe they'll come later, maybe not. It's up to them. I've always said when I go out west and they ask me what should we do, I say, look, it's up to you guys. You want an RTO? Pick an RTO. You don't want an RTO? It's not for FERC to tell you what to do. You do what's best for you. So these utilities chose to join SPP. And what SPP is doing is they're literally taking their existing RTO construct, including the governance, and they're just taking it and cut and paste into this Western Interconnect. So that's what happened today.
Thank you.
Yeah, AJ.
AJ Camacho, E&E News. My apologies for not stating that the first time. I look, Chairman Christie, you were a law professor, and I'm just curious to bring us sadly away from the really rich policy discussion and back to the issue of a lot of the firings that we're seeing. When you look at Humphrey's Executor as a seminal case in this matter, what do you view as being the holding of Humphrey's Executor, which is something that has had some debate around it, and do you think it was rightly decided?
Humphrey's Executor?
Yeah.
If this were a seminar in law school, we could talk about that. But I'm not going to sit here and say Humphrey's Executor was rightly or wrongly decided. Like any other Supreme Court decision, Humphrey's Executor was decided, and it's the ruling, and it's been a ruling since, I think, 1927. And one of the ironies, if it's the Federal Trade Commission that goes up on appeal, that's where it started. So, everything goes around. Because that's where it started, was with the Federal Trade Commission, so it'd be sort of ironic. But it's a decision that the Supreme Court made, and I will say this: if you read SELA law, you can draw your own conclusions, because that's what lawyers do. Lawyers are two-handed, right? On the one hand, and on the other hand. Right. By the way, when I give that answer on SPP, anybody on staff, did I get that right? All right, I must have. Okay. Or at least close enough for government work. Yeah, Carlos.
Thank you. Carlos with E&E News. Several top leaders at PHMSA have taken a buyout since the start of the second Trump administration, including their head of pipeline safety. How does that affect FERC's mission and your review of pipeline projects?
I'm sure PHMSA is still doing their job. I mean, we don't run PHMSA. We want PHMSA to be a robust agency, just like I want the Marine Corps to be a robust agency. I don't have any comment on those personnel changes at PHMSA. PHMSA has a very important mission. I'll tell you. I mean, again, as a state regulator, we had underground safety under our jurisdiction in Virginia, underground facility safety. And our division of underground safety, which goes out and checks pipelines, and not so much as a state regulator, not so much the big interstate pipelines, but we spent most of our time going out on the gas lines that go down your street. When there's a construction going on, making sure that and the missed utility program where the contractors go out with a backhoe and they just start digging, and you don't want them to dig into the electric lines, gas lines, and particularly you don't want them to dig into your cable TV during the tournament. So it's important stuff. We worked with PHMSA. We were delegated because the underground safety program, PHMSA can delegate to states who meet certain standards, and we did. We were the best, of course. And so it's an important agency, very important agency, and with a very important mission. Yeah.
Chairman, can you take a few online questions online?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with Keith Goldberg.
Hi, Chairman. Thanks for doing this. President Trump earlier this week said he was going to direct and authorize the administration to take actions to produce more coal-fired power. And I was curious if you've received any sort of directive or guidance from the Department of Energy or the administration about steps that FERC should be taking, and if not, if you sort of independently are planning or would like to see the commission move forward on any sort of actions regarding the preservation of coal-fired power in any of the jurisdictional regions.
Mm-hmm. No specific directive or request or anything on coal. Here's the important thing about the broader issue, and I've said this 100,000 times. We are losing, and it was in the report today. It was in. I mentioned Dr. Bowering's PJM Independent Market Monitor report. I highly commend the usual high-quality work from the PJM IMM. It's in that report. In the December, just a couple of months ago, the long-term reliability assessment from NERC, all of them are saying the same thing. It's not just me. All of them are saying the same thing. We are losing dispatchable generation at a pace that is not sustainable. We're not replacing it with equivalent capacity value resources. And so what's dispatchable? It's nuclear, coal, gas. Those are the three primary dispatchable resources. There's others. Hydro can be, oil can be, but oil's generally used as backup. So the three primary dispatchable generating resources are gas, nuclear, coal. And the pace of coal retirements has, particularly in an RTO like PJM or MISO, which historically have been very heavy on coal. The pace of retirements is simply unsustainable given the demand increases. I mean, how many times have I said this? On the one hand, this is lawyer talk, on the one hand, you've got demand going up. I mean, again, by numbers that as a state regulator I never thought were even possible, getting load forecasts in the double digits. Dominion came out last week and said they were looking at load forecasts just in Dominion. As a former Virginia regulator, I pay attention. Dominion's looking at 30 to 40 gigawatts of load increases just in Dominion. Now, I know we're ground zero for data center alley of the world, but PJM's all-time peak was about 142 gigs. So we're talking about Dominion alone with a load forecast increase of 30 to 40 gigs. I mean, so on the one hand, you're seeing load increases being forecast because of the data center, particularly the AI-driven data centers. Then on the other hand, on the supply side, we're seeing retirements of dispatchable generation, including coal. We're not replacing it with new construction at a pace anywhere near sufficient. PJM told us in December that they have maybe 2 years before they start to see supply shortages. I'm not talking 20 years, I'm talking 2 years. MISO is also on a knife edge. I mean, so, coal is a dispatchable resource. We have coal units that are operating. I know that there are in non-RTO regions, for example, there are utilities like Southern that are looking at keeping coal units running longer than they were going to keep them running. I think the issue is, are we going to keep coal units running longer than they were going to potentially run? And I think that's already happening. So it's part of the mix. We have to have dispatchable resources, and to the extent that coal is part of the dispatchable resource mix, it's probably going to be is part of that mix. We cannot keep losing these resources when we're not replacing them with equivalent capacity. Actually, we don't need equivalent capacity. We need more capacity.
Okay, let's go with another.
But
Oh, sorry, Keith. Do you have a follow-up?
okay, but again, just to be clear, nothing yet from anyone in the administration about this, and nothing that FERC is going, at least at this point, FERC is planning on initiating on its own accord.
No, nothing. No specific directive. I mean, it's a compelling need to have more dispatchable generation. Coal is obviously, because the coal that's out there now is running. I mean, it's on the grid, and I'll give you another set of numbers. Okay, show you how important this is. Third week of January, PJM hit an all-time winter peak. Third week of January. The generation mix when PJM hit their all-time winter peak was 44% gas generation, 22% nuclear generation, and around 22% coal. That was PJM's generation mix. So it's 88% dispatchable on that coldest day, that all-time winter peak. Coal was 22%. Gas was 44. Nuke was 22. So that kept the lights on. That kept people from freezing to death in PJM. And so the MISO numbers are similar. There's not identical, but so we have the loss of these resources that are keeping the lights on, that are keeping the heat pumps running and keeping people from freezing. That's a compelling need.
Okay, thanks, Keith. We're going to go to Zach Hale.
Hey, Commissioner, thanks again for doing this. I guess just to follow up on Keith's question, just from a high-level perspective, do you think that the current state of grid reliability in the U.S. could potentially justify restarting retired coal plants under the DOE's Section 202C authorities?
Let me say something about restarting retired coal plants or nukes. You know, there's a proposal in Pennsylvania to restart 3 Mile Island, and there's a proposal in Michigan, I think, to restart Palisades. The decision to build, to retire, or to restart a generating unit is a decision for state regulators everywhere, even in RTOs. State regulators are the ones who make the decision. FERC does not have authority to permit a single generating unit. It's states that have that authority. Now, states are in different constructs in terms of how they're financed. If you're in an IRP state, the state regulator literally is going to make that decision to build, retire because they're going to allow it as part of the IRP process, or to restart. Even in the so-called restructured states, permitting is going to ultimately be up to a state regulator. So what we do in our role is, first of all, we have a reliability requirement under Section 215, which is to be the reliability watchdog. We put the reports out, NERC puts them out, and to do reliability standards. But we don't permit individual generating plants. We don't do it. States do it. States do it. So it's a good question. You ask a very good question. Are there going to be restarts of existing coal plants or nukes? Again, I mentioned 3 proposals on nukes. That is ultimately going to come down to a state decision whether they want to do that, whether they want to permit that.
Understood. And if I may, just one more quickly. You mentioned that you met with some folks at the National Energy Dominance Council. Just following up on that, do you anticipate FERC staff, commissioners, yourself, playing an active role in the council's deliberations and policy initiatives? And do you think that the council can achieve its objectives without input from a regulator like FERC?
I hope they ask for my opinion. I hope they ask for my input because I think we have a lot of expertise, and I'm more than willing to offer it in an appropriate way. I mean, we're not going to be getting into ex parte. I said it last month, and we're not going to cross the ex parte line. But we have a lot of expertise here, and I'm always happy to consult and let people know what I think where we ought to be going from a broad policy standpoint. Again, not on an individual case where an ex parte would apply.
Understood. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Let's go with Corey Paul with S&P. And Corey, when you're not speaking, sorry, Corey, when you're done with your question, can you please turn off your microphone?
Yeah, I just turned it on just now.
Yeah, we've been having some interference issues. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for doing this, Chairman. In the DC Circuit ruling the other day that undid the vacatur on the Rio Grande LNG and the Texas LNG projects.
Right.
The court said it was going to leave it to the commission to have the first word on implications of the president's executive orders for the proceedings. So it's sidestepping arguments by the project developers and by FERC that the executive orders undercut the legal authorities, underpinning that original decision. My question for you is, what does the court taking this position mean for FERC? Does it alter FERC's approach as it works on these supplemental reviews towards a reauthorization decision that are like well underway?
Well, that was a very important decision and a very good decision, in my opinion, because the court completely backed off on the idea of imposing what's called vacatur. I was very, very concerned that the court might impose vacatur, and when the court imposes that, basically it nullifies the certificate that we had issued, and in the case of the Rio Grande project, it would stop construction and basically put several thousand people out of work. So they didn't do it, which is good. I'd be pretty sure our pleadings to the court had an impact. I hope so. But even if they ignored them, it's fine. The result was good. So what they did is they sent it back, and they said, you commission, okay, you look at, because one of the issues where we got reversed on in a previous iteration was on we didn't do an appropriate EJ analysis, environmental justice. And so they sent it back and said, you didn't do it right. You didn't have a radius big enough, etc. I thought that was a wrong decision, but they made it. And so you follow it. But when they sent it back this time, they said, we take judicial notice, which they can, that, again, this gets back to my point about the CEQ guidance was withdrawn, which we helpfully pointed out in a subsequent filing to the court. And so if they're going to reverse us on the EJ analysis, and now it doesn't apply anymore, we argued you shouldn't be reversing us on something that doesn't even apply anymore. And basically what they said was, we're going to send it back to you. We're not going to do the vacatur. You figure out what you need to do now. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of describing it, but the order speaks for itself. But I think it was a good order. It kept the project going, and they basically said, in light of the fact that the CEQ regulations no longer exist, the basis for overturning you doesn't exist. So you figure out now what to do. I know that's simplistic. If Bob Solomon were here, he'd probably be appalled. But but I'm not testifying under oath. So there you go. That's a
Can I follow up real quickly?
Yeah.
So I mean, if it's still remanded to do some analysis that you
Right.
no longer have to under the executive orders, would that support a decision on a faster timeline than this notice, the notice schedule, which is November? And of course, when that was issued, then Chairman Phillips had said we would aim to do it faster. But now we're kind of saying the scope of what you might need to fix or readdress is more narrow than last year.
Yeah, I'm not going to signal like how fast it'll be or what it'll cover, because that would be, somebody would say prejudgment. I would probably disagree with that, but I don't want to step close to that line. So I'm going to leave it at that and say we're going to act expeditiously, and I'm not going to I'm not going to prejudge and signal like what we will do.
Okay, thank you. That's a big help.
You bet. You bet.
That's all the questions online, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Listen, thank you guys. See you around.
If there are any staff, any questions for staff, why don't you see me and then we can go from there if you have questions about the agenda items.